Welcome to The Explainer, where we break down the big stories. Today, we're diving into what can only be called a political earthquake, the 2025 Bihar Assembly election. So, November 2025 rolls around, the results come in and, wow! They didn't justify the predictions, they completely redrew the political map of Bihar. The big question is, how on earth did this happen? Well, let's get into it.
Just look at these final numbers. They're staggering. The NDA, that's the National Democratic Alliance, didn't just win, they stormed to power with 188 seats. You only need 122 for a majority, so they blew past that. And the opposition, the Mahagathbandhan, left with just 48 seats. I mean, this wasn't even a contest. It was a complete and total rout. Okay, to really get just how big of a shock this was, you have to understand something about Bihar. The exit polls there have a, let's say, interesting track record. They're often spectacularly wrong.
I mean, just look at this history. In 2020, pretty much every poll said the opposition was going to win. Nope, the NDA took it. And if you go back even further to 2015, the polls completely missed the Mahagathbandhan's landslide. They were off by a whopping 55 seats. So with a history like that, you can see why nobody saw the 2025 result coming.
So, what was the fuel for this political tsunami? Well, it all starts with another record-breaking number.
A jaw-dropping 67.13%. That was the voter turnout, the highest in Bihar's history. We're talking a massive jump from previous elections, and that right there is a huge signal that something fundamental was shifting.
But you know, that big number, that's really only half the story. The real game changer wasn't just how many people voted, but who they were. That's where things get fascinating.
And here it is, the gender gap. This is absolutely key. Women's turnout was an incredible 71.6%. Compare that to the men at 62.8%. That is a nearly 9-point difference. A gap that massive, it didn't just influence the outcome, it pretty much defined it.
Let me put that in perspective for you. In raw numbers, that means 4.3 lakh, or almost 500,000 more women voted than men. And get this, men actually make up a majority of the electorate. So this wasn't just a trend, it was a decisive, mandate-defining wave.
So, what got everyone so fired up? Well, one really compelling theory has to do with this controversial revision of the voter rolls right before the election. The opposition immediately called it vote chori, vote theft, saying it was an attempt to kick their supporters off the lists. But here's the irony. That whole narrative of a threatened right to vote, it might have actually backfired and motivated people even more to make sure their voices were heard.
Okay, so that brings us to the million-dollar question. How did the NDA manage to take this historic turnout and turn it into a historic victory? What was the secret sauce?
It seems to have boiled down to this really potent three-part formula. First, a laser focus on women voters. Second, the power of targeted welfare that people could actually see and feel. And third, a super disciplined coalition that just worked like a well-oiled machine.
At the heart of mobilizing women was a direct, powerful economic pitch, a promise of 10,000 rupees. Now, you have to understand, for the 34% of households in Bihar living on less than 6,000 rupees a month, this wasn't just a campaign promise. This was a potentially life-changing amount of money.
And this really gets at a powerful idea that political scientists call welfare credibility. Basically, it means voters trusted the welfare they were already getting. Things like direct bank transfers, pensions, way more than they trusted brand new promises from the opposition. That existing trust, it pretty much wiped out any anti-incumbency feeling.
And finally, you just have to look at the coalition math. The NDA wasn't just an alliance on paper. It was a strategic masterpiece. Every single partner delivered. The BJP and JDU formed the solid core. And then the smaller partners came in and provided those crucial seats to turn a win into a landslide.
And check this out, this is the perfect example. Chirag Paswan's party, the LJPRV, had an absolutely incredible strike rate. They won 22 out of the 29 seats they even contested. That's a breakout performance that cemented them as a major player and really shows you the strategic depth of the entire NDA alliance.
All right, so to really understand a landslide, you can't just look at the winner. You have to flip the coin and look at the other side, the complete and utter collapse of the opposition, the Mahagathbandhan.
From what we're hearing, it was a whole cascade of critical failures. For starters, there were major leadership gaps. They seem to have totally misread the caste calculations. They just couldn't build a strong narrative around big issues like unemployment. And on top of all that, the Congress Party was seen as a weak link, and their ground game was so poor they couldn't even hold on to their own strongholds. It was a perfect storm of problems.
So, let's zoom out a bit. This election result plugs right into a really big, ongoing debate among academics. Is Bihar finally moving past the politics of identity?
For decades, politics in Bihar was all about one thing: caste. That was the central axis everything revolved around. But this result? It's forced political scientists and researchers to seriously ask if we're seeing a fundamental shift here. A move away from voting based on who you are to voting based on what you get. You know, development.
And this table here illustrates that shift perfectly. This is from actual political science research, and it shows this incredibly powerful link. The more educated a voter is, the more likely they are to vote based on development. Look at this. Only 28% of voters with no formal education chose development platforms. But jump to postgraduates, and that number skyrockets to 81%. I mean, that trend is just undeniable.
So what's the big takeaway here? Is identity politics dead in Bihar? Well, no, not at all. It hasn't vanished. But what's clear is that welfare, development, and just plain good governance have added a whole new, decisive layer to the mix. It looks like identity alone just isn't enough to win an election in Bihar anymore. And that leaves us with a final, really fascinating question for the future. Is identity politics really over, or is it just being forced to evolve?